Last night was by far the most terrifying night I've ever experienced in my life. I'm honestly surprised I'm here right now. If I hadn't listened to my instincts, I would most definitely have faced a gruesome death. So please, take my advice and hide if you hear someone whistling in the middle of the night. Last night I was super excited as this is the first 2-day weekend I've had in over 2 months. My big plans were to buy tons of snacks, set my recliner up to be own little paradise and binge watch some Netflix. I know, boring, but hey, I'm 30 years old and I've been done with the party lifestyle for a while now. Anyways, after probably 5 hours straight of shoveling candy down my throat and watching my favorite shows, I decided it was time to get some sleep. It was about 2 a.m. and way later than I've stayed up in months. After cleaning my mess up and shutting the TV off, I brushed my teeth and climbed in bed. After 15 minutes or so I felt my eyes getting really heavy and I was in between that stage of being awake and asleep. That's when I heard it. A faint whistling. My ears perked up and I listened closely. It sounded like it was coming from my neighbor's complex. We have very thin walls in our apartment, so it's not unusual to hear him at times, but never at 2 in the morning. The whistle was to the tune of Silent Night. The whistle made its way from my neighbors to out in the hallway that separate our doors. A feeling of dread washed over me and somehow I knew I needed to hide. I got up as quickly and quietly as I could and ran into my closet, closing the door all but a crack, so whoever was outside my door wouldn't hear the click of the door shutting. Benny. It sounded like my neighbor, only his voice was somehow off. What I heard next made my heart pound in my chest. My deadbolt unlocked somehow. There was no way he could have unlocked it, not from outside the door. I began to sweat and was struggling to keep my breathing under control as the most intense fear I've ever felt took over my body. I'm coming. Benny. His voice changing pitch at the wrong times. My door slowly creaked open. I heard a soft dragging sound, followed by a heavy thud with each step he took. I could hear his ragged breathing as he neared closer. Then he started whistling again, the same tune as before, only now louder. I was fighting tears as he slowly crept closer and closer to my bedroom. I prayed to God to make this thing go away as I slammed my eyes shut. I knew this thing wasn't my neighbor, or even human for that matter. Everything about it felt off. It stopped just outside my bedroom door and didn't make a sound. From where I was in the closet I could see the entrance to my bedroom door. I wish I had never opened my eyes back up, but of course, I did. At the very top left corner I saw a deformed head poking around the corner. The top of my door frame was at least 6.5 feet tall and this thing was hunched over. It was huge. I couldn't make out any details of its face because my lights were off. The only lighting coming from the street lights shining through my bedroom window. I'm actually glad I couldn't see its face because I probably would have fainted out of fear. Benny. It whispered. I squeezed my eyes shut yet again as I heard it enter my room. I could smell it now and it stunk horribly of rotted death. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I thought for sure I was gonna die. I could hear it yank the blankets off my bed as it searched for me, letting out a grunt of confusion when it realized I wasn't there. It sat still, panting heavily as it must have been figuring out what to do next. Then it started slowly making its way out of my room, once again whistling. Once I heard my front door shut I finally breathed out a sigh of relief, not realizing I'd been holding my breath the entire time. I listened for a few minutes before leaving the closet, and as I sat there I heard another door from across the hall open. What the foo? My other neighbor Tommy shouted after a few minutes. His voice was cut off before he could finish his sentence and I heard a couple of loud thuds, followed by silence. I ended up staying in my closet the whole night and woke up about an hour ago. There were police everywhere in our apartment complex as someone must have found Tommy. I haven't been questioned yet, but I'm sure I will be. I can't tell them the truth. They'll think I'm a psycho and possibly suspect me of killing Tommy. I'm going to lie and tell them I was asleep and act like I have no idea what's going If anyone has any clue what this thing is and what I can do to make sure it doesn't come back, I'd really appreciate it. I have a feeling it will be back tonight and I'm completely terrified. It started with the wood splinters on the porch. It was a new apartment, in a new town, the aftermath of a death in the family followed by a rough breakup. I suspected I was already paying over the odds to stay there, so naturally, learning that the place might be structurally sound left me less than impressed. I called the landlord immediately, asking him if he could send a maintenance guy out to check for necessary repairs. But when I told him about the wood splinters I'd found, the line went quiet. When he finally spoke again, he made some excuse about being busy and offered to call me back later. Only he didn't, and I couldn't get him to answer my calls. Frustrated, I went downstairs to the apartment below my own and knocked on the door. The tenant was an elderly lady, clear plastic oxygen tubes running from her nostrils to a pressurized tank she held by her side. She was pleasant at first, greeting me with a warm smile. But when I mentioned the wood splinters I'd found on the porch, her demeanor changed before she invited me inside. I accepted her offer of hot tea, sipping it as she began to relate a story. I expected it to be one of how frugal our landlord could be, but it was something much, much different. You know that big old manor house just outside of town? It's been derelict for almost a century now, but it used to be owned by the Croft family. I'd heard of the Crofts. They used to be the wealthiest family in town, having owned a series of fisheries along the New England coast. The Crofts had a servant girl, a Romanian gypsy who had lost her family when their boat sank on their passage to America. History has forgotten her name, but not her beauty, and it's said the family patriarch, Howard Croft, developed something of an obsession with her. The two began a secretive love affair, one that ended abruptly when the servant girl revealed that she was pregnant with Howard's child. It was a disaster, an affront to the Puritan morals of the old New England families. And so, Howard locked the girl away in the basement of the old manor house, keeping her under lock and key until she went into labor. When she finally did, she died during the birth. The child was murdered and buried in a tiny, wooden coffin on the grounds of the Croft estate. I was a riveting tale, but I couldn't work out how it related to the splinters on the porch. The two bodies were laid side by side in the woods. When they laid that child to rest, it wasn't alive. Only, it wasn't entirely dead either, the elderly woman explained. The child inside that tiny coffin kept growing, year after year, bigger and bigger, until the box was too small to contain it. Its arms and legs wrenched through the rotten wood, using them to dig itself from the earthen prison and drag itself back into the land of the living. Then, with its body and head still trapped inside the tiny coffin it'd been buried in, it wreaked a terrible reprisal on the Croft family, unceasing in its revenge, until not a single Croft remained in this town. But why would it visit this place? What business could it possibly have here? I asked, having long neglected the porcelain teacup. The answer, the elderly woman replied, lies in an old photograph. Go over to that desk there should be a leather-bound album underneath. I did as she asked, flipping through the pages until I saw something that made my heart skip. It was a photograph labeled Howard P. Croft, 1899. He looked to be a young man, in his early 30s maybe, and although I'd never seen the image before, it was hauntingly familiar. The light blue eyes, the dark brown hair parted on one side. It was like looking into a mirror. Howard Croft was a mirror image of myself. I'd leave town if I were you, the elderly woman's gravelly voice sounded behind me. The coffin man has already paid you a visit. And he won't give you another chance. Link to the original stories in the description. Subscribe for more future content.